What's up, Wizards? Welcome back to Across the Horizon, a collaborative effort between Renaissance Astrology and Hacking Fate. With me is Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, and I'm Michael Beeson of Hacking Fate. We are going to be today discussing the 16th aphorism of Ptolemy. And with this one, I will let you read first, and then I will jump in we'll do it that way.
I'll do Coley, because Coley is the one that seems to me to make the most sense. The Ashman and Partridge
still the good one.
don't. Yeah, sorry. When benevolent planets have dominion in the 8th house and are ill-dignified, he that is then born shall receive damage from honest men. But if these planets be well affected, then the contrary shall happen.
All right, I will go ahead and do Partridge. When the benevolent planets have the rule of the 8th house, he that is then born shall receive damage from good men. But if those planets be well affected, the contrary shall happen.
So Ashman says, when the benefics may be controlled in the 8th house, they bring mischief by means of good men. If on the other hand, they are well affected, they prevent mischief. So you almost have to piece these together because they say, because Coley says, and the opposite. And I'm like, what do you mean the opposite? Because you got two things going on. You mean when they're afflicted or whatever? So it seems to me to say when you have a benefic with dominion in the 8th house, right? And they're well dignified, then that means that you have problems from good men. Wait a second.
I think it's a little bit.
I don't know if they're afflicted. You think the benefics are afflicted in the 8th house?
So here's kind of where things came into me, and I had to dive in myself and read all the translations to get this. So it really looks like Partridge is saying when a benefic rules the 8th house. But then Ashman and Coley, I get the impression that it's that the benefic is in the 8th house. So it's not that it's ruling the 8th house. Because you can't be ill-dignified. I mean,
you can be ill-dignified in rule house.
Well, that's true. You can be ill-dignified in rule house. So, but yeah,
I don't see a whole heck of a lot of difference, to tell you the truth. I wouldn't say that it makes a whole big difference whether you're in the house or ruling the house, right? Because clearly, in either case, the planet is, associated with affairs of that house. And so really the distinction is between, so you're talking about benefics, so we're talking about Jupiter and Venus. And the question is,
would be the benefics.
If they're well dignified versus when they're afflicted, isn't that the contrast?
That is the contrast.
So if it's well dignified, then if you have a benefic well dignified in the 8th, then what?
Then it prevents mischief. They be well.
Well, that would make that's logical.
And then if they bring mischief the other way.
Okay,
I think
that's logical. What I like about this is that that's logical. Okay, it's this Coley. When the benevolent planets have dominion in the 8th and are ill-dignified, shall receive damage from honest men. But if the planet is well affected, the contrary shall not receive damage from honest men. Shall help you, I guess.
So what is the 8th house?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Because the 8th house is providing the context, and this is just like
I don't know though. It's not like enemy house.
Death. I mean, that's.
Well, here's the thing. One of the things that Lilly says about in the natal section of Christian astrology is that if you have a benefic in the 8th, then that brings about a good death. Now, death is not good, right? So it doesn't overthrow the main signification of the house, but it allows you to have a good death. Here's another one from Moran. And he says that if you have a malefic, right, well dignified in the 12th house, then you have secret enemies, right, who are strong, but in the end they help you. So even though they seek to hurt you, what they seek to hurt you actually helps you because it sits well dignified.
That makes sense. I mean,
isn't it weird how you get through this whole thing? So that's what I would say looking at the 8th, right? The 8th is a malefic house, right? It's generally death. I think this is another one of those idiosyncratic techniques, right? And so you're also looking at sort of natural rulership sort of things. So you've got this natural rulership that you would expect the benefics, right, to be helpful. Right, but if they're in the 8th, like I said, if you have a really strong, if a strong ruler of the 8th, like in an illness chart, right? Let's say you have the ruler of the 1st is making an applying square to the ruler of the 8th, and that ruler of the 8th happens to be Jupiter, well dignified. That's not necessarily that good. because it's a strong eighth ruler, right? So maybe you get sick, but it's maybe you recover from it, or it's not the worst possible illness or something like that. So what I think is interesting about this is this combination of the underlying malefic nature of the house, and then how is it modulated by having a benefic, right? And then how further is that benefic modulated by being dignified or afflicted? So you've got really three different multiple levels of nuance that you're kind of, looking through. And the problem we have is that the translations are not clear exactly. Now, what you were saying was that, what was it again? So you said, if you're ruling the house and benefic and well dignified, then you are protected from problems. Is that what was basically what you were saying?
That people will help you.
I mean, that's
They
logical.
It'll prevent mischief.
Yeah.
Actually, it will prevent mischief, not that people will help you, but yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I would say. So think about it this way, though. You have the eighth house, which is malefic. You have a benefic in it, but the benefic is afflicted, right? So you got two strikes against you there and only one positive. And particularly an afflicted benefic is still not going to be that helpful for you, right? I mean, if you're in a situation just in general and you're saying, Jupiter, yeah, benefic, but in detriment, it's gonna hurt you probably. I mean, maybe not as much as an afflicted malefic, right? Which is still, so that I think is really interesting. So that I think what you've come up with is, I would buy that logically. I'm still not sure if that's exactly what those translations say, right? But I think what we've done again is to sort of sort through all the possibilities and come up with something that makes some sense. But what I like about this is this layer after layer of nuance. And I think that's really what distinguishes traditional astrology from modern astrology, is that it's not a good, bad thing. It's not just a like equals like. It's like incredible complexity, because you could think about the eighth house, you could think about malefics in the eighth house. And what about a malefic, dignified malefic in the eighth house, right? Would that be, that's a lot of interesting ideas about, would that be positive or negative? Is it powerful? Things like that. So a lot of interesting issues that come up with this. And I like I said, the layer of nuance. And I think ultimately I like how you've come out with it as far as explaining it.
Yeah. And I almost went off on a tangent about another one of Moran's thinkings, and this is just, since we have a bit of time, I'm totally gonna play this. And this is in his interpretation principles. So one of the things that Moran would say is that the Lord of the eighth house is a well-dignified benefic in the 11th house. Then what's going to end up happening is your fears and anxieties are going to be resolved by your friends and hopes and dreams. Like it carries the subject into the house that planet's in. And that's just one of Moran's interpretive principles. And I kind of see that in some other places as well, but he states it very clearly in that way.
So what if you have so the ruler of the eighth is the ruler of the sixth afflicted, then you die of the illness.
Yeah, that is how that would be.
Right. So let's say you have the ruler of the eighth is Saturn in Aquarius, right?
So for those playing along at home, that's a very well dignified Saturn. That's his happiest.
Well dignified malefic, ruler of the second.
So that's a tricky one. So it would still be of the nature of Saturn, and then it would have something to do with assets. So it's
the illness is cost you a lot of money, but you recover from it in the end and then ends up being, or whatever. You know what I mean? There's a couple of ways you could think about it. You could say, well, the ruler of a strong ruler of the eighth is not good, right? And particularly when it's malefic. So it's a pretty serious illness. But then it's well dignified and it's second house, so there's some money stuff in there. It's almost like you make money from it, or or maybe it costs you money or something.
Because the second can see the eighth, so that even strengthens that further. That it's.
See, I wouldn't normally think about that, but you could throw that in there as an indication if that's something that you got into. But see, this is what I like about this, is that rather than having a preset view of it, this always has to mean this. What we can see is there's these various templates of meaning, and you could go either way on it, and it depends on the circumstances. So it depends on the horary chart or the natal chart, right? And you really would need to, particularly in a natal chart, lay out these possibilities. You know what I mean? But what I like this sort of, like I said, a dignified malefic is very interesting. I mean, I have, like I said, Saturn and Aquarius rising. And so, for example, Saturn Aquarius rising, so it rules, it's my health, right? So I have really good health. I mean, I pretty much in my life have almost had no problems whatsoever. The one thing I do have a problem with is low energy, which makes sense with Saturn, you know, and a certain amount of depression and melancholy and stuff like that. So it's like, even when and Bonatti says this, even when the malefics are well dignified, they lose most of their malice, but they still have a little bit of a tinge of those problematic things. At the same time, like I said, you know, if you have a well dignified Jupiter ruling the eighth, and that's making an applying square to your moon or you know, ascendant ruler or something like that, that's not good. You know, in an illness or death question, that would be problematic in terms of, even though it's a benefic. What's interesting is there's a not one set meaning for things, right? What you get is a matrix of possibilities, but it's not everything. You can't make, I mean, it's not, if you have eighth house involved, it's not necessarily going to be good. You know what I mean? It's problematic generally. So I think it's really interesting. What you end up with is this kind of pulling aside the veil here of traditional astrology and giving us sort of a very interesting idea of these different matrices of possibility. And the nuance is incredible. There's just layer after layer of nuance.
And we will see all of y'all next week.